The BrahMos supersonic missile stands as one of the most formidable symbols of India's strategic rise. A weapon that did more than just add firepower to India's defense arsenal, it altered global military equations. When the BrahMos first roared into existence, it wasn't merely a test of speed or range, it was a test of resolve, ambition, and national self-belief. For decades, military analysts across the world viewed India as a regional power, cautious, calculative, and dependent on foreign defense systems. But the day BrahMos streaked across the Indian sky, the tone changed. The United States, a nation used to defining global military superiority, suddenly saw a new player entering the strategic chessboard, one capable of striking faster than anything they had prepared for. This missile wasn't just fast, it was supersonic. It could travel at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, tearing through the air at Mach 2, 8 to Mach 3. For perspective, that means it can cover a distance of nearly 400 kilometers in a matter of minutes. There's no time for the enemy to think, no space for defense systems to react, no room for error, and that's precisely what sent waves of concern across Washington and other defense circles around the world. For the first time, India possessed a weapon that could breach sophisticated defense shields, outpace interceptors, and redefine maritime warfare in Asia. The most remarkable thing about BrahMos is not only its speed, but its origin. It was born out of a partnership between India and Russia, but over the years, India's own technological input and innovation have reshaped it into something uniquely Indian. Unlike most collaborative defense projects that remain dependent on one nation's expertise, BrahMos evolved through India's drive to refine, upgrade, and indigenize. What began as cooperation soon became self-reliance in motion, a powerful message to the world that India was no longer a buyer of defense solutions, but a builder of them. For the US Navy, the BrahMos created a new dilemma. The Indian Ocean, once seen as an American-dominated zone, now had a missile capable of sinking a ship before an American commander could issue a counterorder. The US had always relied on its naval superiority to maintain influence across Asia, but BrahMos introduced a factor that nullified that advantage: speed. Supersonic speed changes the rhythm of war. It compresses decision-making time and erases the comfort of distance. A US destroyer or aircraft carrier facing a BrahMos-equipped adversary would have to confront a simple, terrifying truth: it might not even have the chance to respond. What makes BrahMos even more unnerving to strategists is its versatility. It can be launched from land, sea, or air. The air-launched version, fitted onto Indian Air Force's Sukhoi 30 MKI, extends its reach even deeper into enemy territory. The same missile that can cruise along sea level to evade radar can also climb high to strike fortified targets inland. It's not a single-dimensional weapon, it's a complete strike ecosystem. In the modern world, where wars are defined by precision and speed, BrahMos represents both in perfect harmony. Beyond the hardware, the psychological impact of BrahMos cannot be overstated. It signaled to the world that India was entering the era of deterrence through technology, a form of silent power that doesn't shout but ensures nobody dares to provoke. The Pentagon's defense analysts and the CIA's security assessments began to take a hard look at what an India armed with BrahMos could mean for the balance of power in Asia. It wasn't about war, it was about control. And control comes from fear, the fear of what your adversary can do, even if they never do it. When Indian scientists tested the extended range version, capable of hitting targets over 500 kilometers away, that fear intensified. It meant that India was not content with parity, it was reaching for dominance in its domain. The United States had long been wary of nations developing independent strike capabilities that challenge its global military hierarchy, and BrahMos did precisely that. Here was a nation from the global south, once dependent on Western imports, now crafting a missile that the West itself struggled to counter. BrahMos became more than a weapon, it became a declaration. It declared that India's era of defensive posture was over, that it was ready to project power, not just protect borders. And while America continued to invest billions in next-generation systems, the reality remained: speed kills, and BrahMos had mastered the art of speed. Every new test, every upgraded version, every successful deployment echoed one undeniable truth: the age of underestimating India had ended. The BrahMos supersonic missile did not make America lose sleep because it threatened war, but because it redefined what India could do swiftly, silently, and successfully. Agni-V stands as the symbol of a quiet but unshakable power, the embodiment of India's determination to never again be cornered, coerced, or underestimated. It is more than a missile, It is India's declaration that distance no longer provides safety to those who would threaten its sovereignty. When Agni-V first lifted off from Indian soil, it didn't just pierce the sky, it pierced the illusion that India was a regional power. It told the world, especially the West, that the new India can reach anywhere, respond to anything, and rise to every challenge without hesitation. In a world where geography once dictated influence, Agni-V erased boundaries. With a range of over 5,000 kilometers, it places nearly every major global power within its reach. Washington, Beijing, Moscow, London, all comfortably fall within that invisible circle of deterrence. And that's the essence of this missile's significance. It doesn't shout aggression, it whispers assurance, the assurance that India no longer has to depend on anyone else for its defense, that its national will is now backed by the quiet strength of technology and precision. Unlike many weapons that are designed for showmanship, Agni-V is designed for silence. It's not paraded as a threat or flaunted as a symbol of domination. Instead, it rests within India's arsenal as a guarantee, a reminder to the world that peace is best preserved when strength is unquestioned. Every successful test of Agni-V sent ripples through defense circles, not because of its range alone, but because of what it represented, a self-made deterrent born of decades of scientific persistence and strategic foresight. For years, India walked a careful path, balancing diplomacy with restraint. But restraint without respect is weakness, and India understood that true peace requires power. Agni-V was the result of that understanding, a result of years of underestimation by those who believed India lacked the technological depth to master intercontinental precision. The success of Agni-V shattered that narrative. It demonstrated that India had not only caught up, but had developed an indigenous missile with world-class accuracy and survivability. The missile's design itself is a marvel of indigenous innovation. Solid fuel propulsion ensures rapid deployment, mobility, and readiness. It can be launched from road mobile platforms, making it difficult for any adversary to locate or neutralize preemptively. The guidance systems are among the most sophisticated India has ever produced, ensuring accuracy within a few meters even at vast distances. This precision means that India's deterrence is not just symbolic, it's credible. And in the world of nuclear strategy, credibility is everything. The United States, long accustomed to its allies' dependency on American defense umbrellas, saw in Agni-V something it hadn't seen before: independence. India wasn't seeking permission, it was asserting capability. That shift in posture made policymakers in Washington uncomfortable, not because India was an adversary, but because India's rise challenged the old order, an order where power flowed from west to east. Agni-V marked the reversal of that flow. It was the moment when India stopped asking for recognition and started commanding it. For the Pentagon, Agni-V's range was less concerning than its intention. India wasn't building for conquest, it was building for deterrence. And deterrence backed by resolve is far more powerful than aggression. It ensures stability by creating uncertainty, the kind of uncertainty that forces every potential adversary to think twice. The missile's reach across continents ensures that any miscalculation against India carries global consequences. What makes Agni-V even more profound is the quiet pride it carries within it. No loud proclamations, no grand displays, just results. Each test, flawlessly executed, reinforced the message that India's scientific community had matured into one of the world's elite. The Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, crafted this missile not as a tool of war, but as a statement of strategic confidence. A statement that India's defense lies not in alliances or borrowed systems, but in its own capability, its own intellect, and its own courage. Agni-V's presence in India's arsenal changed the way the world views South Asia. It elevated India from being a regional stabilizer to a global power with intercontinental deterrence. It forced superpowers to recalculate their equations and recognize that the balance of power in Asia was no longer a two-player game. India had entered the strategic arena as a decisive third force, silent, steady, and self-assured. And that's why Agni-V makes America lose sleep, not because it poses a direct threat, but because it symbolizes a world no longer centered around Western dominance. It's a reminder that power has diversified, that technology has equalized the playing field, and that India, calm, composed, and calculated, now holds the reach to shape its own destiny, no matter how far the challenge lies. Deep beneath the surface of the Indian Ocean moves a silent sentinel, unseen, untraceable, and unstoppable. The INS Arihant, India's first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, represents one of the most profound shifts in the country's defense philosophy. For generations, India's security doctrine was built around the idea of deterrence through diplomacy. But the world learned long ago that diplomacy without the backing of credible force is a fragile peace. The INS Arihant changed that equation forever. It gave India what only a few nations possess: a nuclear triad, the ability to launch a decisive strike from land, air, or sea. That is what makes it not just a weapon, but a declaration. India is unbreakable, even in its silence. When Arihant was first launched, the event did not carry the theatrics of a missile test or the fireworks of a military parade. It was deliberately understated, almost secretive, and that's exactly what makes it terrifying to adversaries. A submarine that can remain submerged for months, powered by a nuclear reactor, carrying ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads, ensures that no enemy can ever strike India without knowing that retribution would follow from somewhere deep in the ocean, unseen and unstoppable. It is this invisible assurance, this cloak of silent certainty, that keeps even the most aggressive nations cautious. The idea behind Arihant was simple but revolutionary. If you can strike from anywhere, you can't be silenced anywhere. Land-based missiles can be destroyed, air bases can be bombed. But a submarine hidden in the vastness of the Indian Ocean is a phantom. It's the embodiment of strategic survival, a guarantee that India's response capability can never be erased. That's what gives true meaning to deterrence. Not the weapon itself, but the certainty that even in the worst of scenarios, India will respond with unimaginable precision and power. From an engineering perspective, Arihant is a masterpiece of endurance and innovation. Building a nuclear submarine is one of the most complex feats in defense technology. It demands not just engineering excellence, but also absolute secrecy and coordination across dozens of scientific domains: nuclear propulsion, stealth acoustics, missile integration, and underwater endurance systems. For a nation that was once denied access to advanced nuclear submarine technology by Western powers, India's achievement was nothing short of historic. It didn't just build a vessel, it built credibility. For decades, the world's nuclear deterrence strategies were dominated by the United States, Russia, and a handful of European powers. The deep oceans were their domain, an invisible chessboard of submarines armed with enough power to destroy continents. India's entry into that realm changed the geopolitical psychology of Asia. The Indian Ocean, once seen as a highway for global trade and Western naval dominance, became a theater of strategic parity. The US Navy, accustomed to uncontested presence in the Indo-Pacific, suddenly realized that beneath those same waters lurked an Indian submarine capable of nuclear retaliation. That realization alone was enough to alter American defense planning in the region. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about INS Arihant isn't its weaponry, it's its purpose. It wasn't built to threaten. It was built to ensure peace through certainty, a peace that comes not from fear of war, but from the understanding that any war would be futile. The submarine carries that message in its silence. It doesn't need to surface, it doesn't need to be seen, and it doesn't need to announce itself. Its existence is its message. For the United States, the rise of Arihant was unsettling because it represented self-sufficiency, a word that often disrupts the balance of global control. For decades, the West maintained its influence by supplying defense technology, creating dependency, and shaping foreign policy through military cooperation. But India's decision to build its own nuclear submarine broke that mold. It proved that even in one of the most guarded technological fields in the world, India could achieve mastery without external help. That independence made more noise in Washington than the submarine ever would underwater. The presence of Arihant beneath the waves also shifted the psychological balance in South Asia. For the first time, India could sustain second strike capability, the ability to retaliate even after absorbing a nuclear attack. This one capability alone makes deterrence real and irreversible. It means that no adversary can gamble on a surprise attack, knowing that somewhere in the dark depths, Arihant waits patiently, ready to deliver justice beyond reach or rescue. In essence, INS Arihant is more than a machine, it is a philosophy made steel, a philosophy that says, true strength doesn't shout, it whispers softly from the ocean floor. It's the invisible guardian that watches without being seen, a symbol of India's strategic maturity and scientific excellence. And for every nation watching from afar, it sends one unmistakable message. India may speak softly, but beneath the waves it carries the power to make the world listen. The story of Tejas is not just about an aircraft, it's about a nation refusing to be defined by limitations. It's the story of a dream that began when the world doubted India's ability to design, build, and fly a combat jet that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best. For decades, India depended on imported fighter jets, each one a reminder that technological sovereignty was still a distant goal. But Tejas changed that. It was not born in a foreign factory or designed in a distant lab. It was conceived, built, and perfected by Indian minds on Indian soil. Every bolt, every panel, every line of code in its flight control system represents a piece of India's growing confidence, a symbol that the country no longer buys pride, it builds it. When Tejas first took to the skies, it carried more than fuel and ammunition. It carried the hopes of 1 billion people who wanted to see India break free from dependency. It wasn't an easy journey. The light combat aircraft project faced skepticism from the world, criticism from within, and decades of technological challenges that would have made weaker nations surrender. But India persisted. Engineers, scientists, and test pilots refused to give up. They poured their lives into building not just an aircraft, but an identity. When Tejas finally entered service, it was more than a military addition. It was a cultural statement. India can, India will, and India has. From a purely technical standpoint, Tejas is a marvel of modern aviation. Agile, fast, and remarkably adaptable, it combines advanced aerodynamics with cutting-edge fly-by-wire control systems. Its small frame and powerful engine make it a master of maneuverability, perfect for air-to-air combat and ground strikes alike. Designed with stealth features and digital avionics, it gives pilots unmatched situational awareness and control. But the true power of Tejas lies not just in its engineering, but in its independence. It's the first time India can field a frontline fighter jet without relying on foreign manufacturers or imported technology. That independence makes Tejas not just a machine of war, but a symbol of sovereignty. For decades, Western powers held a monopoly over fighter jet technology. They dictated who could buy, who could upgrade, and who could compete. Countries like India were seen as consumers of defense technology, not creators. But Tejas disrupted that narrative. Its successful induction into the Indian Air Force and its growing interest from foreign buyers sent a message that echoed far beyond the hangars and airbases. The monopoly is over. The United States, long accustomed to being the global supplier of air power, suddenly saw a new name entering the field, not as a customer, but as a competitor. That realization alone made Washington uneasy. Tejas also carries emotional weight, the pride of a nation that dared to believe in its engineers, its pilots, and its future. Every time it roars across the Indian sky, it speaks to decades of perseverance. It reminds the world that innovation is not the privilege of the West, but the right of every nation willing to dream and work relentlessly. The pilots who fly Tejas don't just fly a jet, they fly the story of their country's transformation. They are part of a legacy that will inspire the next generation of Indian scientists, designers, and dreamers. But Tejas is not just about technology, it's about timing. It entered service at a moment when India's global stature was rising, when the country was asserting itself economically, diplomatically, and militarily. The jet became a metaphor for that evolution, sleek, fast, and unapologetically Indian. It told the world that India no longer needs to prove itself by buying Western hardware. It proves itself by creating what others said it couldn't. The United States watched closely as India began exporting confidence through technology. Tejas's success threatened the unspoken hierarchy of global defense suppliers, a hierarchy that kept developing nations dependent. When India announced plans for Tejas Mk2 and the future advanced medium combat aircraft, it became clear that this was not a one-time achievement, but the beginning of an era. For the first time, an Indian fighter jet was being compared to Western models, not with pity, but with respect. That respect is what makes the difference between dependence and dominance. Tejas is more than a fighter. It's a reminder that strength built at home lasts longer than power borrowed abroad. It's a triumph of persistence over doubt, of innovation over imitation. It proves that true progress begins when a nation stops asking for validation and starts building its own future. And as Tejas soars higher with every flight, it carries a silent message across the skies that India's spirit, once grounded by skepticism, now flies freely on the wings of its own creation. The S-400 Triumph system stands as one of the most defining symbols of India's refusal to bow to global pressure, a decision that sent shockwaves through Washington's corridors and reshaped the geopolitical power map of South Asia. On the surface, it's a state-of-the-art air defense system capable of intercepting enemy aircraft, missiles, and even stealth targets from hundreds of kilometers away. But beyond its hardware, the S-400 represents something far more profound: India's declaration that national security can never be dictated by another nation's approval. It is both a shield and a statement, an eye that sees beyond borders, and a voice that says, India will decide for India. The moment India signed the deal with Russia to acquire the S-400 system, the world took notice. The United States reacted swiftly, warning of potential sanctions under its CUTSA law. But India didn't flinch. It was a rare and powerful moment when a nation looked beyond diplomatic intimidation and made a choice grounded in strategic clarity. The decision wasn't just about technology, it was about autonomy. It was about sending a message to the world that India would not trade its security for political convenience. That single act of defiance was enough to make policymakers in Washington realize that India had matured from a partner into a power. What makes the S-400 truly remarkable is its unmatched capability. Designed by Russia's Almaz-Antey, it is considered one of the most advanced surface-to-air missile systems in the world. Its radar can track hundreds of targets simultaneously, from stealth fighters to ballistic missiles, across a range of up to 600 kilometers. It can engage multiple threats at once, launching different types of missiles to counter specific targets. For India, that meant one critical advantage: no hostile aircraft, no intrusive drone, no long-range missile could enter its skies without being seen and, if necessary, destroyed. The S-400 turned India's airspace into a fortress, not through aggression, but through awareness and readiness. But the S-400 is more than a technological marvel, it's a strategic equalizer. For years, the United States maintained dominance through its air power and global surveillance systems. The presence of the S-400 in India's arsenal disrupts that equation. Suddenly, American-made fighter jets, including the much-celebrated F-35, face a new challenge in the skies of Asia. The Pentagon knows that even its most advanced aircraft cannot fly unnoticed where the S-400's radar scans. That awareness breeds respect, and sometimes sleepless nights. The balance of power in the Indo-Pacific subtly shifted, not because India expanded its territory, but because it expanded its vision. In military terms, the S-400's presence creates what strategists call an anti-access area denial bubble. It means that any hostile aircraft or missile entering Indian airspace does so at its own peril. For neighboring countries that rely on air intimidation, this was a wake-up call. For the United States, it was a reminder that its influence no longer guarantees control. The Indian decision to prioritize defense over diplomacy showed that global alignments are fluid, and that India is now strong enough to chart its own path without fear of isolation. What truly unsettled Washington was the manner in which India handled the entire situation. It neither provoked nor pleaded, it simply acted decisively, confidently, independently. In an age where many nations bend to economic or political pressure, India stood tall and said, "Our defense choices are not negotiable." That quiet assertion of sovereignty carried more weight than any weapon. It reminded the world that alliances are temporary, but national security is permanent. The installation of the S-400 system across strategic locations in India fundamentally changes how the nation defends itself. It creates a protective umbrella over major cities, military bases, and borders, ensuring that any aerial threat can be neutralized long before it reaches its target. But beyond its physical protection, the S-400 acts as a psychological deterrent. It instills doubt in the mind of any adversary contemplating aggression, and in modern warfare, doubt is as powerful as any missile. For decades, the US maintained that superior technology equaled global authority. But with the S-400, India demonstrated that power now flows from diversification, from the ability to choose freely among global partners based on national interest, not political pressure. The system became a metaphor for India's broader foreign policy, pragmatic, fearless, and self-defined. It was a clear message to both allies and rivals. India listens to everyone but obeys no one. In truth, the S-400 Triumph system is more than a defense platform. It is the technological expression of India's strategic independence, a tool that guards not just its skies but its dignity. It has become the eye that never blinks, scanning, watching, protecting, while also reminding the world that India's vision now extends far beyond its borders. For the first time in decades, it isn't India seeking security guarantees from others. It is India creating security for itself on its own terms. The INS Vikrant is not just a warship. It's a moving declaration of India's arrival as a maritime power that no longer operates under anyone's shadow. It represents the culmination of decades of ambition, persistence, and innovation. The name Vikrant, meaning courageous or victorious, is not symbolic, it is prophetic. Every inch of the ship carries the story of a nation that refused to remain a coastal spectator while others ruled the seas. Built entirely in India, designed by Indian engineers, and crewed by Indian sailors, the INS Vikrant is a 45,000-ton reminder that India's future dominance lies not only on land or in the air, but also across the vast expanse of the world's oceans. When the ship set sail for the first time, it wasn't just a naval milestone, it was a national awakening. For decades, India depended on foreign-made aircraft carriers, relying heavily on imports and external expertise. But with Vikrant, India shattered that dependency. The nation achieved what only a handful of countries in the world have managed: the construction of an indigenous aircraft carrier. This was not merely about steel and engines. It was about belief that Indian technology, Indian design, and Indian resolve could match and even exceed global standards. The scale of Vikrant is awe-inspiring, stretching over 260 meters in length and powered by 4 massive gas turbines. It carries a full fleet of fighter jets and helicopters, capable of launching coordinated air and sea operations. It serves as a floating city, a mobile base of power projection capable of asserting India's presence across the Indian Ocean and beyond. Its deck, expansive and formidable, is a stage where India's air power meets maritime dominance. For the Indian Navy, it's not just a ship, it's the cornerstone of blue water capability, the ability to operate freely, globally, and decisively. What makes Vikrant so strategically significant is the timing of its arrival. In an era where the Indo-Pacific has become the new center of global attention, the ability to project power at sea determines a nation's influence. The United States, with its carrier strike groups, has long used maritime dominance to maintain global supremacy. China has followed that path with its growing fleet of carriers, but with Vikrant, India made a statement that it would no longer be a bystander in the battle for oceanic influence. It would be a player, confident, capable, and commanding. The ship's presence ensures that the Indian Navy can protect its interests, secure its trade routes, and respond to any threat in its maritime neighborhood without waiting for foreign support. For Washington, Vikrant was a wake-up call. The US Navy, accustomed to seeing India as a regional ally rather than an independent naval power, suddenly saw the emergence of a competitor, not in rivalry, but in capability. Vikrant symbolizes independence from the Western defense ecosystem, showing that India no longer needs to lease, borrow, or buy to assert dominance. It builds, launches, and commands on its own. That shift in mindset, from reliance to self-reliance, is what truly keeps America's defense planners on edge. It's not the tonnage of the ship that worries them, it's the confidence behind it. Beyond its steel hull and fighter jets, Vikrant carries something intangible yet far more powerful: national pride. Every rivet and radar on that ship is a product of Indian labor, intellect, and perseverance. It represents a generation of scientists, engineers, and shipbuilders who refused to settle for good enough and aimed for excellence. It's a monument to a nation's ability to rise, innovate, and create something world-class from scratch. And when it sails across international waters flying the Indian flag, it becomes more than a vessel. It becomes a moving symbol of what India now stands for: self-sufficiency, sovereignty, and strength. The presence of Vikrant in the Indian fleet also changes the strategic dynamics of the region. It ensures that no adversary can dominate the Indian Ocean without consequence. It acts as a deterrent, not through intimidation, but through capability. The ship's ability to operate independently, to project air power far from the Indian coast, and to coordinate with other naval assets turns India into a true blue water power, one that can shape the future of maritime trade, regional stability, and global security. Every superpower has had a defining symbol of its rise. For the US, it was the aircraft carrier. For the Soviet Union, it was the nuclear submarine. For India, it is the INS Vikrant, the floating fortress that announces to the world that the nation's strength is no longer confined to borders, but extends across horizons. It embodies decades of effort, centuries of aspiration, and an unshakable belief that a great civilization deserves a great navy. And as Vikrant cuts through the ocean waves with the Indian tricolour flying high, it tells the world one undeniable truth: India is no longer just guarding its waters, it is commanding them. Akash and Astra, two names that now stand as twin pillars of India's aerial defence revolution. They represent not only weapons, but vision, resilience, and the relentless drive to protect the skies with indigenous power. For decades, India's air defense was dependent on imported systems, leaving the nation vulnerable to supply chain politics and technological restrictions. But with Akash and Astra, India broke those invisible chains. It created its own shield, one forged not by foreign contracts but by national will. Together, these missiles have turned India's airspace into a fortress, watched over by precision, speed, and self-reliance. The Akash missile system was India's first major step toward developing a homegrown multi-target air defense network. It was designed to detect, track, and destroy enemy aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles at medium range. Built by the Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO, Akash embodies a remarkable blend of Indian engineering and military foresight. With its supersonic speed and ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously, it ensures that no hostile object can breach Indian skies unchallenged. But Akash is not just a missile. It's a statement that India no longer needs to beg for protection. It builds its own. When Akash was first deployed, many critics doubted its performance. They compared it to foreign systems like the American Patriot or the Israeli Iron Dome, assuming India's indigenous product couldn't match up. But successive field tests and operational deployments silenced those voices. The Indian Air Force and the Indian Army both adopted the system, and its real-world reliability turned skepticism into admiration. Each successful interception reasserted the truth: India's security does not depend on imports, it depends on innovation. Akash proved that Indian technology, when given the resources and the faith it deserves, can meet world standards. Then came Astra, the next evolutionary leap, a beyond-visual range air-to-air missile that took India's air dominance to a new height. Designed to strike enemy aircraft at distances exceeding 100 kilometers, Astra allows Indian fighter jets to destroy threats long before being detected themselves. It travels at more than 4 times the speed of sound and is guided by sophisticated electronic countermeasures and precision radar homing. In simpler terms, it turns every Indian aircraft into a hunter, fast, deadly, and untouchable. The missile gives Indian pilots not just firepower but psychological advantage. Knowing they can hit their enemy before being seen changes the dynamics of aerial warfare entirely. What makes both Akash and Astra extraordinary is that they are completely indigenous. From propulsion systems to guidance software, from radar integration to data links, every critical component is Indian-made. That independence is what unsettles nations like the United States, which have long dominated the global defense market through technological control. When a nation develops its own missiles, it breaks free from the global dependency that sustains military hierarchies. That's what India did with Akash and Astra. It removed itself from the customer list and joined the ranks of creators. In the Pentagon, analysts took notice. The Akash system gave India the ability to shield its airspace without relying on NATO-approved platforms. The Astra missile, on the other hand, gave India something even more significant: parity. It put the Indian Air Force in a position where it could face advanced fighter jets like the F-16 seconds and F-15 seconds on equal footing. The combination of these two systems meant India could both defend and dominate the skies, a dual capability that few nations possess. Beyond the battlefield, these missiles carry emotional and symbolic weight. They represent the culmination of decades of scientific perseverance, political will, and national pride. Thousands of Indian scientists, engineers, and technicians work tirelessly to bring these weapons from blueprints to launch pads. Every successful test is a salute to their labor, a reminder that India's defense capability is written not in foreign manuals but in Indian minds. The integration of Akash and Astra into India's defense network has fundamentally transformed the country's strategic landscape. It has created a layered air defense grid, Akash defending from the ground, Astra striking from the air, ensuring that India's skies remain impregnable. It gives decision-makers in New Delhi not just security but flexibility. India can now respond to any aerial threat, from drones to fighter jets, with precision and confidence, without waiting for foreign supplies or approvals. But perhaps what makes Akash and Astra truly remarkable is the message they send. They prove that India's rise is not built on borrowed strength, but on its own innovation. They show that technology, when driven by vision, becomes more than machinery. It becomes national armor. These missiles remind every potential adversary that the age of underestimating India's air power is over. For the first time in modern history, India's skies are watched not just by radar and pilots, but by 2 Indian-made sentinels, Akash, the vigilant protector, and Astra, the fearless hunter. Together, they form a shield that no longer depends on others to hold, a shield that embodies India's sovereignty, resilience, and unshakable commitment to defend its skies on its own terms. When nations talk about the future of warfare, one term dominates every discussion: hypersonic. It represents speed beyond imagination, technology beyond reach, and power beyond defense. For decades, this domain was ruled by only two names: the United States and Russia. But today, there is a third name that commands attention in that same conversation: India. The Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, has achieved what many believed was impossible: the successful testing and development of a hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV, a weapon designed not just to match the future but to define it. The hypersonic glide vehicle is not just another missile, it's an entirely new class of weapon. It travels at speeds greater than Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound, and glides through the atmosphere with unpredictable trajectories that make interception nearly impossible. It doesn't follow a conventional ballistic path. Instead, it maneuvers mid-flight, changing direction and altitude, rendering traditional radar systems useless. This capability has sent shockwaves across the world's defense circles because it challenges the very foundation of missile defense. For America, which has long relied on its network of satellites and missile shields to stay untouchable, India's leap into hypersonic technology was a rude awakening. The DRDO's success was not accidental. It was the result of decades of scientific persistence and quiet determination. The organization began developing scramjet technology years before the global race for hypersonics became public. Scramjets, supersonic combustion ramjets, are engines that can operate efficiently at hypersonic speeds using atmospheric oxygen rather than carrying bulky oxidizers. This innovation allows the vehicle to fly lighter, faster, and farther. In September 2020, India conducted a landmark test of its hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle, HSTDV, proving it could sustain flight at speeds above Mach 6. That single test placed India in an elite club of nations possessing indigenous hypersonic capability, a club previously reserved for the US, Russia, and China. What truly unsettled Washington was not just India's success, but how quickly it happened and how quietly it had been developed. Without foreign dependence, without massive external aid, DRDO built a platform that could potentially deliver nuclear or conventional warheads at hypersonic speeds. Unlike traditional missiles that can be detected and tracked, a hypersonic glide vehicle can evade every known defense system. By the time it appears on radar, it's already too late. That realization has kept Pentagon strategists up at night, because once India integrates its HGV with platforms like Agni-V or BrahMos 2, it will have a deterrent system that no nation can confidently neutralize. But the weapon's power is not just in its speed, it's in its strategic ambiguity. No one outside DRDO fully knows its range, payload, or operational readiness. And that's the beauty of it. A weapon that is unseen but known to exist becomes a psychological equalizer. It projects deterrence without aggression, strength without confrontation. It ensures that any adversary, whether across the Himalayas or the Pacific, must think twice before testing India's patience. The hypersonic glide vehicle gives India not just offensive might but strategic respect, the kind that comes when a nation masters technology others fear. This development also carries profound symbolic importance. For years, global defense markets treated India as a buyer, a lucrative customer rather than a creator. Every new jet, radar, or missile had to come with imported signatures and foreign conditions. The HGV changed that narrative forever. It proved that India could build what the world's most advanced powers guard as their crown jewels. It proved that Indian science, when given the resources and autonomy it deserves, can create world-defining technologies. The United States, which once viewed India as a strategic partner but not a technological rival, suddenly had to recalibrate its equations. The existence of an Indian-made hypersonic glide vehicle altered the balance of perception, from a developing defense power to an independent innovator of next-generation weaponry. This shift is what truly unsettles Washington, because hypersonic technology isn't just a weapon, it's a marker of scientific dominance. It signifies that a nation can not only protect itself, but also shape the future of global warfare. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that DRDO's hypersonic program is still evolving. The tests so far are just the beginning. The potential to pair this glide vehicle with India's existing missile platforms, or even with future reusable space systems, opens an entirely new chapter in both military and aerospace innovation. It could revolutionize how India projects power, how it deters threats, and how it asserts sovereignty over its technological destiny. In essence, the DRDO's Hypersonic Glide Vehicle is not just a piece of advanced engineering, it is India's declaration that it refuses to be a spectator in tomorrow's wars. It represents a future where Indian defense science is not catching up to the world, but racing ahead of it. It embodies speed, stealth, and supremacy, the three traits that define the next era of global power. And that is why this one weapon, still in its developmental stages, has already begun to make America lose its sleep.